So one of the historic challenges that is faced in this class is that students seem to get really comfortable with correlation and scatter plots because it seems like it's easier to wrap their heads around. And one of the things that they tend to avoid are comparing groups, which actually a lot of you suggest on your discussion board post this week. And so this video is going to show you how to create group comparisons, or to have one of your axes basically be nominal level data or group level data. And so for those of you that have decided to try this, kudos to you, because it's I guess in concept a little more challenging for people, but it also seems a little bit more straightforward once you figure out how to do it. So in order to get started, the first thing you need to do is just to remind you where the database is located. So if you don't have a copy of the database already for yourself, if you go to the week 13 course materials folder and you scroll down to the week 13 assignment, then here you'll see an Excel document marked by the .xlsx extension, and you can click on that and download it. And I've already done that, but basically it'll give you our database that's here. And for this particular example, what I want to do, and this question is now off limits, but what I want to do is, I'm curious, or my research question is, does the area that people live depend how many people live in their household? Okay, so I'm going to look at two columns of information: whether people live in rural, urban, or suburban environments, and then also how many people live in their household. Okay, so one thing that you can do to make this a little easier for yourself, so you know exactly which columns you're working for, is if you left click on one of the cells that you're interested in, and then you can move your mouse over and down, and what that'll do is it'll select the two columns that we're interested in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move up here to the little paint can, and I can make this any color that I want, but I'm going to make it yellow just so it pops out to me, and so I can keep track of exactly which columns of data I'm going to be working with. The other thing that I can do while I'm in here is that you'll notice that I need to do a little bit of cleaning. So for example, this particular person, instead of putting in the numeral 5, put in the spelled version of 5. So I'm just going to change that to 5. And the reason being is that for the formulas that we're going to use to calculate averages and standard deviations, we need this to actually be a numeral. It can't be the written word here. And I'm going to change this 3 down here too. So now we have a nice clean data set that we can work with. And what I'm going to do to make things a little bit easier, and this will be especially important for people that don't happen to have columns right next to each other, but actually have to kind of spread themselves out across the database, is that you can just select the columns that you're interested in looking at. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to do paste special values, the little clipboard with the numbers, or alternatively what I could do is I could go to paste special here, and then select values. And the reason that why I do this is just because it makes things a little safer when we do some of the calculations that we'll be doing. But what you'll notice here is that we have the two columns that we're interested in. And so basically what I want to do is I want to calculate the average number of people that live in households for people that live in suburbia, people that live in a rural environment, and people that live in an urban environment. And so what you'll notice is this is a little tricky, because here it's pretty random as far as what different environment people live in. So I can make this a little easier for myself, though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the two columns of data that we're interested in, and then I'm going to drag my cursor down and select everything that we're looking at here. Now what I'm going to do is, if you go to the top of the screen, what you'll notice is that there are a bunch of different options. I'm going to go to the data option, and then within the data option, one of the options is to sort my data, and I'm going to select that. Now one of the things that I need to check is whether I have this box checked, of whether my data has headers. So in this particular case, my data does have headers, and those headers are basically the questions that were asked of people that took the survey. So what you'll notice is that it changed the area that I selected, and so now it's only the data that's relevant for us to do this. If I uncheck this box, what you'll notice is now it selects these top rows, but we don't really want these top rows to be sorted. We're fine with where they're at right now. So I'm just going to check this box again, and then what I want to do is I want this to be sorted so that all the suburbans are together, all the rurals are together, and also all the urbans are together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go sort by, and because I've left my data headers in there, it's a little simpler for me. I can just sort by where do you live. If I click on where do you live and click OK, what you'll notice is now I have all the people that are in rural environments or live in rural environments come up and are close together, suburban and for urban. So that's the first stage of the process. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little table here. And for that table, I'm going to write down the 3 different environments that people could live in according to this survey. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the average number of people that live in a household for people that are currently living in a rural environment. So in order to do that, I'm going to make use of a function that's in Excel called the equation. And for the equation, basically what I can do is I can select the cell where I want the results of the equation to be, and I can put in an equal sign. And that equal sign just lets Excel know, okay, I'm about to put in some sort of an equation, and don't read this as data that's in our survey or database or anything like that, but instead this is an equation, so I'm going to need you to do some sort of mathematical comparison here. And the equation that we're going to use is one called the average function. And so I'm just going to type average in here, and it gives me a little note of what does it want me to take the average of. So remember, here I want to take the average of the number of people that live in your household if you live in a rural environment. So I can just click on one of the first cell in there and just drag down, and I just need to make sure to be careful that I only select the data related to people that live in a rural environment. I can close off the parenthesis here, and if I click enter, you'll notice that the average is 3.6. I can do the exact same thing for suburban, and you'll notice it doesn't have to be all upper cases. I've just gotten in the habit of doing that. But I'm going to select the first person that grew up in a suburban environment, the rest of the people in a suburban environment, and it looks like the average is 3.7. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for an urban environment. And so looking at our means, it looks like there's really no difference between people that live in a rural or a suburban environment. The number's just off by, 0.1. However, there does seem to be a little bit of a difference where people that live in an urban environment tend to have what looks to be less people living in their household on average. So the difference here is 2.8 as compared to 3.6, 3.7. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. It does appear that there are less people living in a household in an urban environment than in rural or suburban. Now, one of the other things, and one of the reasons why people really like the mean is that, or the average, is that you have a measure of variability associated with it, and that's called the standard deviation. And basically what the standard deviation does is it says, on average, how far away do people score from the mean? Okay, so the bigger this number is, the more widely varied the scores are for that particular group. And the lower it is, the more closely all of the numbers in that group are related or are to each other. Okay, so for example, if we look at our rural group, you'll notice that by and large most people had around like a 3 to a 5. So here, probably, except for this one person that had a 2, if we were to just consider these people, we'd have a pretty low standard deviation. Now for suburban, you'll notice that our numbers go all the way from people that have one person living in the household all the way up to 6 people. Okay, so you'll notice there's a pretty wide range with some people having 1, some having 3, some having as many as 5 or 6. Okay, so this is going to increase the variability, and so our standard deviation should be bigger here for suburban compared to rural. And then it looks like a similar thing's going on in urban. This is yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the standard deviation is. Just looking at the numbers, it looks like there might be a pretty high standard deviation here. But in order to calculate the standard deviation, we don't have to do too much math. All we have to do is we just hit the equal sign, and then if we just do standard dev, or stdev, and then we want to do dot or period s, and then again, we're going to create parentheses, and this one we specifically want to be for people who live in a rural environment. And there we go. So here, for this group, our standard deviation is 1.14. So on average, people tend to score, or to have 3.6 people living in their household, and on average, people score or tend to have one plus or minus one person living in their household with them. Okay, so we're going to do the exact same thing here for the rest of the groups. In fact, we can even go down, click that, and select this for suburban. Now, one thing that I will point out is that on newer versions of Excel, they've added this .s. So you used to just be able to do stdev and then the parentheses, but this is a new thing to specifically calculate the standard deviation for a sample, which we'll talk about in your stats class, and really isn't relevant here. But if you are using an older version of Excel, or if it it should give you some sort of an error message if you put this .s in, then just go ahead and put stdev, and that should still give you the standard deviation. It's a pretty new change that's happened in Excel. And then for the urban environment, we're just going to do the exact same thing. Okay. Now, one of the things that we were talking about before is we said that there wouldn't be as much standard deviation for the people that lived in a rural environment versus suburban, and that's what we actually see reflected in the standard deviation here, although the standard deviation difference isn't giant. And then kind of the interesting case was in the urban environment, and it looks like it fell about midway in between both rural and suburban. So I guess it's a little nerdy, but I guess a little fun with estimating standard deviations just by looking at numbers. Man, I lead an exciting life. But so that gives us the data that we need in order to be able to create a graph. So to create this graph, things are pretty simple once we have them average in the standard deviation. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the data that I want graphed, which is going to be my mean and the particular label that I want represented on the graph. And I am going to go to Insert, and we could do Recommend Charts, but I know that I'm going to want a bar graph here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first bar graph that I get, which should be a good option, and when I look at it, that looks like what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And by and large, this graph looks good, except there's just a little cleaning up that we need to do. So I'm going to show you how to do that cleaning up. So one of the things that we could do is we could put a title in here. So it could be something like people maybe this would be a better one to do. Average number of people in a household and different living environments. And that looks good, minus the typos that are probably in here. And so now we have a title that lets people know in a single glance what's being represented in this graph. Now, if you watch my other video, one of the things you'll notice is that I don't like these lines. So what I can do is if I just put my cursor right on that line and I left click, you'll notice here it's selected each of the different lines behind the graph. I can just hit delete, and that will get rid of them. The other thing that I want to do here is I want to make it so that everything is in black and white, because especially if we're putting something into a printed document that we're going to print, that makes things a lot easier. So one of the things that I can do is I can change the colors of my bars here. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cursor and put it over any one of the bars, and I'm just going to left click. And so you'll notice all 3 of the bars are selected, which is good. That's what I want to happen. Now, what I can do is I can go, if I right click, I can go to Format Data Series. And one of the options that I'm going to be looking for is the fill here. So I'm going to want a solid fill, and I really like a black fill. So I'm just going to go in and change that fill to black. And this looks like a pretty nice black and white graph. Now, another thing that I want to do to clean this up is I want to kind of give the y-axis a little bit more room to breathe. You notice there are a lot of numbers here. And really, I think if we just put whole numbers here, or numbers without fractions, that would actually make things a little bit clear. So in order to clear up this axis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a number on the axis, and I'm going to left click, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to go to axis options that's showing up here on the right hand of the screen, and I can set how many numbers I want on the axis. So I think 4 is a good number to leave on this axis. I think that's fine since we're looking at averages. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that major unit, and instead of being 0.5, I'm going to change it to 1. Now I go ahead and I hit enter, and what you'll notice is now my y-axis is a little bit cleaner. I have numbers without decimals over here. The other thing that I can do, so for some reason it's not giving me any sort of axis bar over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take care of this, although in all honesty I forget how to do this. Maybe a line, and if I go solid line and black, oh, there you go. Cool. So that worked perfect. So now I at least have a line to separate my y-axis. One of the things that I can do is if I want both of my lines to be the same color, because you'll notice they're different here, if I select and left click on one of the labels in my graph at the bottom here, I can do the exact same. Here you'll notice that the line is a light gray. I'm going to change that to black, and that'll look a little bit clear. And probably the biggest thing that I really need to change in my graph, though, is that I don't have any x or y axis labels, and those are really, really important. So in order to add the labels, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select on my graph again, and I'm going to go up to, you'll notice that when I select my graph, there's this Chart Tools option. There's a Design tab and a Format tab. For the Design tab, I'm going to add chart element, and specifically I'm going to add axis labels. So I'm going to start off with my primary horizontal axis, and you'll notice that I have this little box here, and what I can do to make that box a little clearer to see is go ahead and drag my graph up a little bit. And so now you can see here, if I just go ahead and left click on that box and I select all the text in it, I might do something like household environment or living environment or something like that. And I can go ahead and type that in like I would in PowerPoint or any other software like that. And now I need to let the reader know exactly what it is that's on the y-axis. And so this was the number of people that lived in subject's household. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to select my graph, and this time I'm going to go to Axis Titles Primary Vertical. And notice I got this little box here to make it a little clearer. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it around, and maybe I do something along the lines of like number of people in household. Okay, and for some reason it moved that, so I'm just going to move it back up so it's a little prettier. Maybe adjust my graph a little so it looks nicer. And we're good to go. So this looks like a pretty good graph. Now, one thing you'll notice is that things seem a little bit scrunched in it. And one of the ways that we can kind of get around the scrunchedness is if we right click on our graph, and we need to do it in a spot of the graph where it doesn't capture anything else. One of the things that we can do is we can go to Move Chart. And so if we click on Move Chart, basically what we'll be doing is creating a new tab that contains only our chart. So we're going to select New Sheet, and I'm going to call this bar graph, but you could name it anything that you wanted to, and maybe to be a little clearer, I'll put an underscore and do like living environment, and number of people. Oh, seems like I've went beyond the number of things that I can type in the sheet, but that should be good enough so that I can at least identify it. And what you'll notice now is that it gives a separate tab to the data that I'm specifically using in the bar graph. And so actually it gives us more space to work around. So if we really wanted to make things nice and pretty, we can move things around and play with some of the font sizes and stuff like that. If I wanted to change the font size, one of the things that I could do is I could just left click on the label here, select the text, and if I go into home, I can change this. Let's say I want to make it Arial. I can do that. And let's say I want to make this point 18 font. I can do that. So it's as simple as changing the text in a Word document. The other thing that this is like my own little weird quirk, but I hate these little lines that show up around the graph, and you can get rid of them pretty easy. You can do this even when it's a tiny little graph in your database. But if you right click, you can go to Format Chart Area, and one of the things you can do, or one of the options that will come up under this paint can, is you can go Border No Line. If you select that and you click off your graph, now what you should see is no border around your graph. So hopefully that helped with bar graphs. The one thing that'll be a little more complicated is if you're looking at 2 rows of variables. So for example, maybe you want to look at people that own versus rent, you know, in a suburban environment or a rural environment. Then what you can do is you can actually create 2 columns to do that. And whenever you do your sort function, and I will just show you here, whenever you do your sort function, you can actually add different levels. So if you go to add level, let's say that we wanted for some reason to sort by both the number of people that live in a home and living environment. We're already sorting by where do you live or living environment. We could sort by how many people do you live in the home, and here we could sort from smallest to largest. If we do this, what we'll notice is we still have our groupings of rural, suburban, and urban, except here the numbers always go up. So we have 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, and then for suburban, 1, 1, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6. Okay, so it's helped both it's sorted both of these columns. So this might be helpful to some people that are doing multiple columns. So hopefully that helps people. Let me know if you have any questions, or also feel free to use the discussion board this week to try and get some help with graphs if you run into problems.